Welcome back. I'm Bill. Let's talk about the dunk test. Sometimes you get a lantern or a stove or some other gas pressure appliance and it doesn't seem to be holding pressure, or it loses pressure quickly, or it leaks fuel out the side or out the bottom. Something's compromised somewhere, and sometimes it's difficult to figure out where. And you can swap pieces out. You could put a different fuel cap in, you could put a different check valve in, you could mess with the valve, you could inspect the fount. Usually if the fount's leaking, it's going to be pretty obvious. But one surefire way to figure out where not just a leak, but multiple leaks are coming from is what we call the dunk test. And that's where we pressurize the fount, and then we dunk it in a bucket or a sink or something full of water, preferably something with plenty of light so you can see where the bubbles form. So that'll show you where, maybe your fuel cap gasket is bad and maybe your valve is leaking. Or in this case, this is an AGM fount from the early 40s. This thing, even though I look at it and they're not real obvious, there's one here. That's really the only, well, there's one here. This thing is riddled with stress cracks. I already know that. And I'm going to use some 2-part gas tank sealant epoxy on this. But before I do that, I thought, let's see how we can do the dunk test. So what you want to do, get the lantern, preferably stripped down to this point so you can see what's going on with the valve. You don't have to go this far. And chances are your fount probably isn't compromised at the top, but you never know. Sometimes the bung is compromised. A lot of these AGM founts have spun bungs and they'll leak up here too. Sometimes they've been silver soldered or lead soldered and it's not quite sealed from some previous repair. So it's best if you can strip it down to this point so you can see the valve. You've got put the fuel cap on and take the pump clip or pump screws out, but leave the pump in and make sure it works. So we'll close the valve and we'll pump it up and make sure, in this case we need to unscrew that to open the check valve, but we'll pump it up and then we'll dunk it in a bucket of water or a sink full of water. I like to use my kitchen sink because it's nice and white and I've got bright light there so I can actually see the bubbles. So let's take this there. So we've got our sink full of water. You can see this will be good lighting and good background to see any leaks. The reason I left the pump in, again, if it's leaking, you may lose air pressure by the time you get your sink filled up and get it here. So let's open that check valve. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The check valve is closed, and then now pull the pump out and this will let you see if bubbles are coming out of the check valve. So put it in the water, and as you can see, this fount is fizzing like a champagne bottle. So yeah, it's got lots of stress cracks. But one thing we can see, my water level's not quite high enough, but I can still splash water on the valve and I don't see any bubbles. There are no bubbles coming out of the check valve. I'm going to replace the fuel cap anyways. But we also don't see any bubbles coming out of the fuel cap. Now we do see a lot of, you can see, that's what happens when your fount is stress cracked. You can see all those bubbles coming out. And while you're at it, roll it over. Make sure the bottom's not leaking either. So this way you know, if your fount's fizzing like this, you know you've got stress cracks. If you've got holes in the bottom, you know you've probably got rust holes, and those are, yeah, that's not a good thing. I can see there's one little rust spot here. The fount looks otherwise good, but no bubbles there. So the bottom is good. No bubbles coming out of the check valve, so that's good. If you get bubbles there, then you know you need to service your check valve, and I'll throw a link up to my check valve video. If you've got bubbles at your fuel cap, you need a new cap gasket, and I'll throw up the link to my fuel cap video. And if you see leaks around the valve here, then you know you need to service the valve somewhere. Maybe it's not shutting off properly, or you could have leaks at some other point along here if one of these nuts isn't tightened properly. And this is also a good time to check around the bung. On these AGM founts, a lot of times people will just try to unscrew the valve from the bung without putting a 3/4 inch wrench on this hex, and they'll end up spinning the bung and it'll leak. Sometimes they'll try to fix it with silver solder or lead, and it won't seal all the way. So it's also good to check around the bung. So in this case, all we know is this fount is, well, I'll say it's toast, but we're actually going to fix it. So